Carol didn't teach you to I wasn't sure. I did. Yeah.
What's that? Oh, yeah, okay. No,
If somebody needs to be closer, you can move up to the front row here. Just be careful with the corners. If everybody's fine. Good? Okay.
Okay. I know you're probably thinking I'm not old enough to have a license back in 1955, but I was just a kid back then, 7th grade, and junior high school, grew up in Fresno, California.
I'm sorry.
It was a good place then. I'm glad I'm out of there now. There we go. Okay. And oftentimes people ask, well, why'd you get into ham radio? And well, back in those days, one of the toys was to take 2 tin cans, piece of string, and a wax candle and wax that whole string, and then tighten it and hold it up to your ear when you wanted to hear, or put it in front of you and talk. And then it wasn't too long after that when technology took place and they came out with battery operated units, but they were still connected by wire, but it was better in a tin can anyway. And it was the idea, the wires tied you down. You couldn't get very far. I wanted to be able to talk to somebody without wires that could be anywhere in the world. Ham radio, well, not ham radio, but communications, electronic communications, started back in 1844 with Samuel Morse when he invented the telegraph. And again, everything was connected with wires, but it worked pretty well, and it got people employed to go cross country, straighten wire and stuff like that. What can I say? Things, it's probably hard to think back to the days when we didn't have computers or didn't even have TV, didn't even have, well, we had 1 or 2 radio stations in Fresno when I was a kid. And you see how things are today, and it's kind of hard to imagine what life would have been back at that time. Because I was junior high, I had a paper route, and there was a guy that lived a street over and half a block away. And one day I heard him, well, in 7th grade, we had to do a science project, so I made a crystal set, and I heard this voice on this crystal set, and I go, wow, that's not what I was expecting. And so I looked around the neighborhood, and he had a nice tower with a nice big antenna. I go, that's where it is. So because I was his paper carrier, it was easy enough to go up and talk to him and tell him I was interested. And he showed me his radio, and it was a big, huge thing. Nothing like today.
One tube was the size of the radio today.
No kidding. They were huge. Even way back when, there was some progress developed from 44 to 1890. Well, we went one, if you can go back, there we go. Whoops. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Guy named Marconi invented a wireless telegraph where you didn't have to have the wires connected. You could just be just about anywhere. And even by as late or early, however you want to think of it, in 1901, he was able to transmit across the Atlantic. And I guess you might say the big thing was that the type of radio that it was, and that's a picture of his radio. Oops, where'd we go? There. The radio is on the table and the antenna is that thing up there. And the signal was generated by electric arcs. And so they were messy. They sent waves all over the place. You couldn't direct them very well. It worked, but it certainly wasn't one of the most ideal types of transmitters. He went from Cornwall, New England, made it to St. John's, Newfoundland. That was the trip across the Atlantic. And all he did was send a series of 3 dots. Dit, 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 dit. And that's probably all his ears and his body could endure from the arc going on. Anyway, that was the beginning of a lot of good stuff. Okay, tonight we're going through in your manual what is called T1, T2, and T2. And there are, well, we're going to divide all of that in half. Dick and I will, I'll do the first half, TA through TF, and Dick will do let's see, you'll be T, T, E, F, and T2, A, B, and C. So, and on the test, well, yeah, on the test, there will be 67 possibilities total. Well, we'll be going through 67 questions. And if you want to know what's in store, there's a pool, a question pool, and I think you can find it in your book, where there's 423 total questions that the FCC has, and then they take combinations for making up people's tests. So the chance that you're going to get 2 of the same questions probably is going to happen because they have such a variety. When you go through in your manual, it just gives a basic answer. On the test, you're going to have 4 options, A, B, C, and D, to choose. And I know sometimes when you have those options in front of you, it's too easy to memorize simply by the letter O. A is the answer to such and such a question. Well, when it gets on the test, they may have that question, but they may have the answer in a different spot. So my suggestion is don't memorize by whatever letter that you find the real answer at. Memorize the answer itself. Get a gist of what it is. Okay. These are some of the topics that we're going to have in T1A tonight. There's, at the bottom, it says Government Control Agency, the FCC, Federal Communication Commission. They kind of run everything. But under that organization, there are several active and neat, what I'm going to call communication organizations. RACES, for one. It looks like races. There's a whole bunch of different races. A swimming race, hurdle race, whatever, track races. Well, it's not races, it's RACES, which stands for Radio Amateur Civil Emergency Services, and very active. And then we also have the ARES, Amateur Radio Emergency Services, and MARS, which is Military Auxiliary Radio System. And I think at one time or another, I've been in all three of those organizations. I was in the Navy MARS program, and the Army and Air Force are fairly active today, but I've not heard anything about Navy. So it's, I don't know where it is, what's happened to it. But anyway, these initials are going to be coming up periodically throughout the course, and you will hear once you become a amateur. And we kind of just throw those initials out, and we because we've heard it for so long, or maybe I should say I've heard it for so long, I don't even stop to think, maybe the person I'm talking to, maybe they don't know what that is. So anyway, it's a good thing just to get a little more familiar. Okay. Now we're down to questions and some answers. Which of the following is a purpose of the amateur radio service as stated by the FCC rules and regulations? A, B, C, or D? What do you think? Yes, good. It is C. The whole purpose of amateur radio is for us to develop technical skills and communication skills and put radio to good use. And a lot of those good uses are when we have emergency kinds of situations. And I have to say, Iron County is really good about calling on our radio club when there is something that's happening. And to keep us in practice, the city and the county oftentimes will have what we call exercises just to keep our skills tuned in. Sometimes people have asked, well, what's the purpose of the FCC? Why did it ever happen? And between 1901 to 1934, there was a lot of growth in people developing, I'll call them radio or methods of communication. And it got to be so complicated, the government said, well, we got to step in and make some regulations. And that's where the FCC comes from, is just to be able to organize and keep things in shape. Okay. Which one do you think, what agency do you think rules amateur radio service in the US? FCC. Yes, indeed. Who knows what a phonetic alphabet is? Yeah, when you take a letter in the alphabet like A and you put a name like Alpha, B, Bravo, C, Charlie, and the FCC has come up with their recommended list of phonetic alphabet. And it's like, why have that? What would be the purpose, do you think?
Clarity.
Yes, a lot of times with different accents, someone might say George, and it could come out sounding different to somebody from a different ethnic background. And that could apply to any letter. And it would be sometimes when you're giving your call sign, you might use Kilo 6 Quebec Oscar Golf, K6QOG, my call sign. It just, sometimes it helps in difficult situations. And so the FCC developed what they have as their recommended words, because you could throw in almost anything you want, but they prefer to use theirs. And it's not a regulation you have to. It's, the answer is number D, they just encourage using the phonetic alphabet. And I think you have it on in the very back cover of your manual. If you have it handy, look at the very back cover.
That's the back cover.
Oh. Yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah, it's listed there, good. So you can go back and see what words they use for the letters. How many operator slant primary station license grants may be held by any one person? One, yes. Yeah. Ron? Oh, okay. Before I go on, there's one license, but it has two parts. And one part is you getting authorization to use the radio. And the other part is to have a station that you operate. So anyway. If somebody came up and asked, how can I prove that I have a ham license? What do you think would be the best way to show or tell and prove to a person that I have a license? And they could say, oh, you just made it up. You go, the place of authority is the FCC. And you can go online, and I'm going to say, after you take your test in about 10 days, sometimes a few days longer, sometimes less, depends on how active the FCC is. Your name and a call sign will be given to you, and people can go online and go look it up. And that's verification that you really have a license when it's on that website. So it's, the answer is number C there, if you're wondering where it comes from. Anybody know what ULS, where it says FCC ULS? Universal License System. Okay, this is asking what is a beacon station? How does the FCC define what a beacon is? And they basically are saying that it's number C. It's an amateur transmitting different kinds of communications for the purpose of primarily trying to find out what the atmosphere is like, what kind of radio conditions do we have at a particular point in time. And sometimes there will be some experiments with frequencies, types of transmission, what type of signal goes up and gives them whatever they're trying to test.
And is that built into the radio? Is that a component of the radio?
No. A radio will be built for different modes of communication. One is like if you have a telegraph key and you go da-da, da-da, da-da type thing, or one where you talk, and there's several different ways to talk. One is like, and it's an older way, is like when you listen to the AM radio, you know, it's just a steady signal and the audio comes out of that signal. And then it progressed where whenever you talk, depends on how loud it is, the signal will go up and then it'll come back down after you say a word. It's you'll end up learning about it later. It's called single sideband. And then when you listen to the FM radio stations, that's still a different mode of transmission also. So there's a number of different type of modes. Most of those modes, or I will say a lot of those modes, not all of them, are built in today's ham radios. They oftentimes, well, most of the time, they are limited to the frequencies that we are entitled to operate on. So, and I don't know of a radio, there may be one, but I don't know of it, that would be the type of radio that would send out a signal on a frequency that I'm not entitled to operate on anyway, to find out what propagation, what radio conditions would be
So
like.
under this definition of the transmission itself is the beacon.
Yeah.
That they're gathering or they're collecting data from.
Yeah, it's, well, the beacon is the radio and antenna combination. It just sends, the antenna sends out an electromagnetic wave, which then they measure and they can tell what propagation is like.
What was bleed over?
I'm sorry?
Bleed over.
Bleed over. That happens when, like AM radio stations and FM can also, when you're on a frequency, you're supposed to be on such and such frequency. And if you overdrive your transmitter, instead of having a nice signal right where it's supposed to be, it will bulge out on one side or the other. And this becomes a problem when you get real close to the end of a set of frequencies called a band that you're allowed to operate on. Sometimes people will get right on the end, and then part of their signal will go beyond the frequency in which it's supposed to be. So they would call that bleeding over.
I got a letter from the FCC quite a few years ago, and I was bleeding over onto Pahrumps Fire Department. One, and they were right on it too. I mean, we had 72 hours to take care of it. But I didn't understand how the bleed over occurred at that point.
Sometimes if two stations are close together, one can interfere with the other. Sometimes just the radio itself is not tuned properly and the signal doesn't stay where it's supposed to be. And another cause to make it go out where it belongs is shouting or turning up what they call the mic gain, and it's too loud for the radio, and it just will go where it should.
Amateur radios.
Yeah, it can happen, yeah. The FCC definition of a space station. What do you think it is?
Musk sending those satellites up yesterday.
Wasn't that something? That was so neat last night.
Did you see it?
Yeah, Starlink, I counted 10
Yeah.
of them. I was trying to figure out last night how high they were. And I don't know.
They were more than 31 miles.
Yeah, I would think, but who knows how much farther. But anyway, a space station or anything in space is generally considered anything over 31 miles, or as you will see on the test, it'll say 50 kilometers. 50 kilometers is basically 31.06 miles. So.
That takes special permission to use that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because when they were on Olympic stages, the satellites, the law enforcement agencies did.
Okay. Which of the following entities recommends transmit and receive channels and other parameters for auxiliary and repeater stations? Who regulates that kind of stuff? It's
Volunteer?
yes, absolutely. It's a volunteer in an area, and the hams in that area vote for who they want to be frequency coordinated, who decides, okay, for such and such type of transmission, it will be on such and such frequency. And they do that for just all kinds of different activities. And they will, a good example is we have basically 3 repeaters. Well, there's probably more than one associated with one of the radios, but we don't have a local frequency coordinator. There's one up in Salt Lake, only because they have a whole lot more repeaters within their area. And if somebody didn't coordinate the frequency, the guy who owns them just sets it up to whatever, could end up interfering with somebody else. So he has a big job trying to coordinate however many hams that want to have repeaters, and they like to put them up on the mountaintops, obviously, because that's when you get the best distance. And that way, none of them will interact and interfere with each other. So that's good. And it's not in the test, but here in Utah, we're part of a series of repeaters that are all hooked together, beginning down by Las Vegas, goes up through us, up, I was gonna say along I-15, but not too, some mountain peaks aren't too far away from 15.
Yeah, you can show them that.
Oh. Yeah, I'm not sure how well you're gonna be able to see the cover of this, but it's a tower with these, yeah, they're directional discs. And these are kind of neat. Like, I kind of wish I had a cover on my satellite dish, like the covers on these, because it keeps the snow off of them and stuff like that. And I don't have a tower like that either, but but anyway, they go into Idaho and into Wyoming. Do we go into Montana? I don't know if we go into Montana.
I don't think they go in Montana, but it will go into parts of Arizona, from Vegas to Utah, up to Idaho, and a little bit of Wyoming.
Yeah, so you get on whatever repeater in your area, and you can talk from Arizona, Vegas, all the way up to Boise and beyond.
How do you get on the repeater?
With the radio, and you know the frequency that it uses.
I'll talk about that.
Oh,
So
jump ahead here. okay, which of the following describes the radio amateur emergency service? What does it do? What is its purpose, do you think? Make it easy. It's all three of A, B, and C are all part of why we have the racist community. When is willful interference allowed? Yeah, just common sense tells you, no, that's not the right thing to do. Get on and cause interference with somebody else on purpose. You know, I hate to say it, but California has a lot of people that, well, I better not say a lot, a few people that don't have that value in their life. It's something other than be nice to others. Another reason why I'm glad to be out of California. Anyway. Okay, these are just some of the things that we're going to see in the next section called T1B.
I'd like to make a comment right here. If you notice, we went through one section that had approximately, was it 9, 10 questions there? On the test, you will have one question from each section. You can count on that. So one of those questions you just saw will be on your test. And then through the next section will be a bunch of questions. On the test will be one of those questions. So there's 35 questions, there's 35 categories. each category has its own little set of questions that we're getting in. So that can kind of help you study for things. And if you find one group you're really having difficulty with, the thing to remember is don't sweat it, because you will only see one question in that group. And you're allowed to miss up to 9 questions and still pass. So when you go to study for it, it's important to know all the questions and not know all the answers. But if you have one section that you're having trouble with, don't let it give you anxiety. Because you're going to have to deal with one question. It's multiple choice of 4 questions. You have a 25% chance of getting it right. So, but notice we just jumped sections. So all those questions we previously seen, you will see one of those questions on the test. Go ahead.
Okay, on the last slide, there, amongst all the things we're going to be looking at tonight, was ITU. That's all. It didn't give any explanation what ITU is. So we come to a question is, what is, well, first of all, this question tells you what ITU stands for, but what is its purpose? It's not something that we hear all that often, ITU. What do you think the International Telecommunications Union is all about?
A.
It's B. Yeah. It's an agency for information and communication technology, points of interest, issues, or whatever you want to call them. And it's international. So a lot of times that organization will coordinate with a similar organization in another country. And so that way we get coordinations between the European nations and US. Coordinate with Canada and Mexico. So it's a good agency, because the FCC doesn't have any authority outside of the US. So we can't tell other nations what they have to do. So it's nice that we have organizations that can work together and come to an agreement. I probably shouldn't say this, but they probably get along better with other nations than our Congress does. Okay, which amateur radio stations may make contact with an amateur radio station on the International Space Station? And it's telling you what frequencies you can use, 2-meter band or the 70-centimeter band. But who can do that? B, right. Anybody who's got a license, you can do that. My first license was not a technician. It was called a novice. And there was very little that we could do as novices. And you could only be a novice for, was it what? 2 years? What? 2 years. Was it 2 years? God, that was.
Back then it was 1 year.
Well, that's even further back than when I was a novice.
Fortunately, they've eliminated that class and start with technician. And they've eliminated something else that you'll eventually hear about too. So anybody who has a licensed technician or higher can get on the 2-meter band or the 77-meter band. And if you have the right frequency and the right kind of antenna, where you can track the space station, then you can talk to them. Talked about different bands. I've already mentioned 2 meter and what other one have we mentioned? Have I mentioned? No, I haven't mentioned 50. Yeah, 70 centimeter. I was trying to think. 10 meters is another band set of frequencies that you as technicians can use. And so we get familiar with, if we say 2 meters, 10 meters, 40 meters, etc. And sometimes, well, this question basically is, how do you come up with, and for this question, what is the frequency, I guess, what is the frequency of the 6 meter band? There's a mathematical formula. Yeah. You take 300, divide it by a frequency that's within the 6 meter band range, which is 52.525, and it comes out to 5.711, which is almost 6 meters. And the reason for that is because bands have a lot of frequencies, many of them, from one end to the other. And if you take one of the frequencies at one end, you will either be 6 point something or you will be 5 point something. And this particular frequency that they use as an example is not right smack in the middle of the band, not too far off, but not smack. So that's why it didn't give you 6 even, you got 5.7 instead. 28.50, anybody know what that band would be called without looking? It's called the 10 meter band, which you as technicians can operate on with voice. And it has the calculations there. Pick a frequency, divide that into 300, and you'll come close to one of the bands. Just take a guess. The frequency is 146 megahertz, 0.52. Would be, what band would that be on? What band would we call it? If you got a calculator, take it out and divide the frequency into 300. You'll come close to the number of 2. The answer is A up there. It would be in the 2 meter band. When you're use your radio a lot and you see the frequencies on your dials and you equate this frequency 146.52 as 2 meters. It just comes automatic after a while when you think. Well, seeing and thinking together makes a lot of difference. Here's the calculation, and you get 2's close enough. Yes?
You always use 300?
Yes.
That's a given.
Yeah. Any frequency into 300, no matter what the frequency.
And the reason for that is that the speed of light is what radio waves move at. The speed of light is approximately 300 kilometers per second. So that's why 300 works.
Thank you, Ron. I didn't know that. Okay, what is the limitation of emissions, which means transmission type things on the frequency between 219 and 220. It's basically asking what can you send on any place in between those two frequencies. Yeah, it is B. You're right. Whoever said B, it is. Yeah, it is B. Back when I got my license, they didn't have any digital messaging formats, and now there's more than I have time to use. But it's a process where if the internet went down and there was no email, people could send messages on a fixed digital message system. Of course, you have to know somebody who has the radio equipment and that kind of equipment, because it just doesn't come by itself. Well, you get it on your computer, let's put it that way. Right. Which of the HF bands does, and HF stands for high frequency. We have low frequency, high frequency, very high frequency, ultra high frequency, and up and up. So an HF band is one that is most common and most accessible for most people's radios. And that's what our licenses are geared for anyway. And it's asking you, okay, what HF band allows technicians to talk on voice? B, the 10 meter band. That's at the very top of the HF, and then you go into VHF after you pass up the 10 meter band. And if you have one of these band graphs, and I think it's in your book somewhere.
Page 17.
Okay, page 17. When you just look at where the 10 meter band thing is, it has green and red and yellow, and then it's got a chart of what those colors stand for over on the right column there. And the yellow stands for voice. It's called the mode. Don't worry about it. It'll be something you'll learn about, but it's what we call single sideband. But it is voice. And that says technicians can use that. When you look at the graph on the big long bar, it says, okay, any of those frequencies are accessible to extra class, advanced class, and general class. And then on the short bar, it has N. Let's see, does it have a T? Yeah, N, T. You can see it better up here. No, N was part of the graph before the N standing for novice got eliminated. So, but it does have the T for technician. So it says technician can use this lower portion right here. And the yellow is for voice. mentioned VHF and UHF, very high frequency, ultra high frequencies. It's asking which of those frequencies ranges are limited to CW, which is Morse, stands for Morse code. Used to call it chopped wireless, CW, chopped wireless. I don't know if that
The actual term is continuous wave.
continuous wave, I know, but when I was a kid, we used to call it chopped wireless, CW. Oh, well, anyway. Of all those various choices and frequencies there, which ones are limited to Morse code only? And number A, 50.0 megahertz to 50.1 megahertz. Speaking of 50 megahertz, what band would that be? Do you have a calculator where you can divide 50 into 300? Yeah, 6 meters. Okay, what about 144 range? 2 meters, right. So on 6 and 2 are the only bands in the VHF, UHF range that you can use code. Otherwise, it's going to just be voice. And well, anyway, we'll go past that one. Which of the following is a result of the fact that the amateur radio service is secondary, they're not primary, but it gets a secondary rating on all or some of the amateur bands. What that's saying is hams are second rate when it comes who gets priority on some frequencies. We get some priority, but a lot of the bands that we have for our use, we are on a secondary level, which means if sometime we're on a band and we hear some other real strange, odd communication going on, it might be that's the one that's primary and we're secondary. So that means we have to shut up and let them have their communications without interfering with them. They get priority. Okay, why should you not put your radio transmitter right on the edge of the frequency band that you want to use, is what the question's asking. Let's see, what is it, five, I'm trying to think of what my AM radio goes down to, 560? I don't think it
540s.
does it go down, the AM band go down that low? The AM portion of the band, you don't find any radio stations that are right smack on the edge of that band, whether it be the lower edge or way up on the upper edge, because there's always a good possibility that something could happen where that signal will go beyond that limit. And if it was something that just happened instantaneously once, probably not a problem. But generally when something like that happens, it goes out and it stays out there. And the FCC can come and say, you are fined for having communication outside your legal area.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Well, what'd you call it?
Well, they say in the letter it said legal, but what it's called.
I guess there's several different terms for that. Anyway, the answer is all of them, D, because the possibility, some radios are really good and they don't change frequency, but on some cheaper radios, they may drift one way or another as heat builds up in the cabinet sometimes. And if it was to move just a little bit, it might go just right outside the band limit. So that's another reason why and sometimes, it's really hard to know if your radio transmitter shifts frequency or not. Back in the old days when I had one box was a receiver and another box was a transmitter, sometimes it was hard to hear if my transmitter was on or off frequency, just a hair. Well, that's my ears. The FCC has electronic equipment that measures that. So I couldn't get away. I couldn't play. Well, I didn't know that. That wouldn't go over very well. So the idea is you don't ever want to get anywhere near the edge of a band that you're operating on. This is, well, it was just a demo, kind of a diagram. Right here is the edge of the band, and for whatever reason, part of the signal went beyond that edge of the band. And so the FCC's naughty. Over here, there's enough distance from the edge of the band to if this was to move or something happened to it, it gives you a little leeway, little space. So just don't plan on thinking, oh boy, there's so many stations out there, but there's an empty spot right by the end of the band. That's never a good idea. Which of the following HF bands have frequencies available to the technician class operator for RTTY, which stands for what? Radio telegraph. And for data transmission. And it's saying, it's asking just about what technicians are authorized to use teletype on. What HF band can you use teletype on? And the answer is D, 10 meters. The red up here will also allow for digital data kind of signals. So that chart comes in handy sometimes. Yes?
So to be digital, you have to have a computer.
Yeah.
Hooked to the radio.
Yeah.
Can you do that as a technician?
Yes. What is the amount of power that you are authorized, maximum power that you're authorized to use on high frequency bands? Anybody have an idea of what your limit is? 200. And on the chart, right up here, novice technician again, your maximum power is 200 watts. If you go on to 40 meters, it'll also say 200 watts. 80 meters, 200 watts. 15 meters, 200 watts. And those were our old fun favorite bands when I was a novice and technician, general. Things are a little different today once you get to the general level. Your power rating goes up a whole lot. Except for some specific regulations, what is the peak power that you can have on frequencies above 30 megahertz, going up into the VHF, UHF range? Absolutely. You go to maximum, the FCC says ham's maximum power is 1,500 watts. And you can use that power on any of the bands above 10 meters. Well, I just can't say all bands, but most of them.
But not technician.
No, when you're above 30, anybody can go up to 1,500 watts. So. Okay, here are some of the things in the C section, and I can see I'm going to have to stop talking and start moving a little faster. Okay. For which license class are new licenses currently available from the FCC? Pardon? Technician is one. What are some other classes that are also available? General. And what else? Amateur, extra, and what else? That was a tricky question because there is no what else. That wasn't nice. I'm not fair. There's only 3 levels today when years ago there used to be 5 of them. So they cut them down, made it more simple. So the answer was number D there. But as I said, don't memorize A, B, C, or D, just memorize the wording. Who may select a desired call sign under the vanity call sign rules? Vanity call sign is where a person picks what they want their call sign to be. Who can do that? Exactly. Number D is any licensed amateur, whether you're brand new, if you want to get your own call sign, maybe something fits your initials or it fits something that you like, you can request it from the FCC. Somebody may already have it, so they'll say sorry, but if it's a call sign that's not taken by anybody else, yeah, they'll give it to you. And it comes in under vanity. I guess people, they think, oh, you're being vain because you want your own call sign. Ta-da! Not sure why they use that term vanity, but anyway. You can get your own call sign if you don't like the one with the FCC. Sylvia?
A lot of people use their initials or something that reminds them of what it is, so that it's easy for them to remember. A lot of them use initials as part of the name.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's why they call it vanity.
Okay, what type of international communications is an FCC licensed amateur radio station permitted to make? It's basically asking you, can you from the US talk to, say, a station in Germany? Yeah, you can, because Germany's government says it's okay. So any country that says it's permissible to talk to people outside of Germany or whatever country you're talking about, then you can do it. There has to be permission from that government to be able to do that.
And how do you go about getting that permission?
You don't have to get the permission. The guy you talk to has to know that his government permits him talking to you.
Third party agreement.
Yeah.
So like, not Russia. You can actually talk to Russia quite a bit, but I wouldn't count on getting North Korea.
And when you talk to other stations, well, let me just say, you're not allowed to talk business. You talk about yourself, fun things you do, just any kind of a personal conversation you can have with, and that applies to anybody, not just foreign governments, but basically not to do any kind of business. But when are you allowed to operate your amateur station in a foreign country? This is very similar.
When it's authorized.
Yes, when it's authorized. And oftentimes let me just say, some countries have a standing declaration that U.S. citizen ham can come to their country and talk. Some countries do that, some don't. Some you have to notify their government and say, you're going to be in their country from this date to that date. Do I have permission to use my radio? And then they'll let
The
you.
United States do.
I think U.S. just has a standing permission that people from other countries, if they are licensed in their country, then they have permission to use the radio in our country. I think that's.
A lot of times if you go to a different country, they will give you a temporary call sign from their country to use while you're there too.
Well, a while back ago, I was in Japan for 2 years, so I applied to their government and got a Japanese call sign. So I had their call sign to use when I was there. I didn't use it when I came back here.
These Japanese letters?
No, fortunately, it was printed in English. In the 2 years I was there, I didn't learn I learned a little bit of Japanese speaking, but not writing or reading it. Anyway, okay. Which would be a valid call sign for a technician? Which one of those three?
K1.
K1, XXX, yes. Technicians can have either a 1 when they'll go 1 by 3. That will mean either K or a W and then one letter. And a number then that indicates what state or what area of the US you're in. And then you have 3 other. Or you can have a 2 by 3. You can do K or W, and then another letter. Trying to think of what I've seen is fairly common. I don't know, it can vary. Pardon?
KB7.
Okay, KB7XXX. 1 by 3 or 2 by 3. And when you get to general and extra class, they have different arrangements, and they get to have smaller letters. Which of the following locations may an FCC licensed amateur station transmit? Right. And you don't have to ask permission. If you're on some kind of a ship, in a plane, and you're in international waters, and whatever that vessel is, ship or plane, as long as it's registered in the United States, you can transmit from that vessel without asking anybody else for permission. Just hope that the captain of the ship or pilot of the plane says it's okay. There are what you will come across that there are ITU regions, and there's 3 of them. And on the map, you can see we're in region 2. A lot of Europe's in region 1, and well, even region 3 too. They get divided up. And so there's kind of a common governmental regulations that go within each of those regions. What happens if the FCC sends you a letter in the mail and it gets returned to them? Is that a problem? Yes, you can have your license suspended or taken away from you if you do not notify the FCC whenever you move. It could be within the same city, doesn't make any difference. Give them a change of address and you'll be all right.
Is there a form or something that you fill out or download, or how do you do that? You can just go right online to the FCC website.
Okay. What is the normal term for a amateur license? Doesn't make any difference which class, but technician, general, or extra. How long is your license good for? 10 years. It's good for 10 years. And at the end of the 10 years, you get a certain amount of time, I'll call it leniency, that they'll give you how much time to go ahead and, what do you think you would have to do in that, in whatever time period after your license expires and you haven't renewed it? You have a certain amount of time to go ahead and renew it. What is that time frame, do you think? It's 2 years. If you don't renew it in 2 years, and at 2.5 years, you decide, oh, I want to renew my license. What's the problem?
We have to take a course over again.
You may have to, because you got to take the test again. But within that expiration time, you don't have to take the test. All you have to do is just fill out the forms to request your license renewed. When you take the test and Ron tells you you've passed, how long do you have to wait before you can get on and use a radio? Exactly. Number C is if every day after your test you log on to the FCC database, and when all of a sudden one day pops up, there's your call sign in your name, then you can go ahead and begin to use your radio.
You have to have a call sign. So unless you have a call sign, you can't transmit. So you're notified of your call sign online on the
ULS, Universal License.
So as soon as you see the website, you can start transmitting.
Okay. Okay, we've kind of covered number 11. So we'll go over to the next section. Some of the things that will be covered in this D section. What countries can you not talk to? It's what they're asking. What countries are the FCC licensed amateur stations prohibited from exchanging communications? Actually, that hasn't always been the case. I hate to use Vietnam as an example, but well, we were more on Vietnam's side. Oh well. Anyway, it's basically if the country says they don't want their people talking to any outsiders, then can't have any communications with him in that country. It's number 8, because the country will notify the ITU and say no communications. And I don't know how we would find out, but generally my guess is that we would not hear stations from that country that says, no, we don't want you to communicate. That sound about right?
Yeah, that's why you mentioned earlier, you're probably not going to be talking to North Korea.
Yeah. Which of the following circumstances may an amateur radio station make a one-way transmission? Get your microphone, push the button, and just leave it pushed. Well, they're talking about not talking to, a one-way transmission is not calling or talking to a particular person. Some of you probably don't know it, but there's a radio station run by ARRL that sends out signals to nobody in particular, and they do it on Morse code. And they start maybe at 5 words a minute, and then they go to 10, and they'll move up over a period of time, and different days will have different speeds that they will send things. That's a one-way transmission because they're not directing it to any one person. So they're sending Morse code practice, which is permissible. There are stations that do voice transmissions, and they will, in talking, have all kinds of news items. So what answer is the right one? B, yes. Code practice, informational bulletins, and as somebody mentioned right at the beginning, if there was some kind of an emergency situation going on. But I have a hard time imagining, I could see short transmissions where somebody up in the mountains is lost and they have their radio with them and they just go, can anybody hear me? Anyway, information bulletin, code practices, and that kind of thing. Okay. What this is asking, when can you send information that is coded so that nobody can understand it? Yeah, when you sending control signals to a satellite, those are coded commands. When you talk to the person, it's very audible, but any kind of a command to the space station is coded. And if you do model airplanes, for instance, there's no talking, there's no audible thing to hear other than maybe some tones, but no messages that we can understand. So space stations and model planes, boats, or cars, or whatever, those remote things don't ID or say anything. Under what conditions is an amateur station authorized to transmit transmit music using on a phone type of transmission? Only when it's dealing with the space station. Sometimes you might end up relaying a message from the space station to somebody else, and there may be some music that's involved along with that message. And by the fact that it came from the space station, that's permitted. But we can't put our own music. And that reminds me, a lot of times if we're mobile in the car, have the car radio on and also our ham radio, and so all of a sudden we hear a station on and we want to talk to them. sometimes it's easy to forget, turn off or turn down the car radio to talk on the ham radio. Because if your microphone picks up your car radio and there happens to be music, you will be violating the law. Times that I've been mobile, I have to say, I never had the two radios at the same time on, but I know it does happen. Okay. When can a amateur operator use their stations, use their radio to say somebody's got some radio equipment for sale? Or maybe you have some equipment you want to sell. When is trying to get somebody to buy some equipment, radio equipment, permissible? Yeah. As long as it doesn't become a business. Because amateur radio is not commercial. Not supposed to deal with business things, but yeah, you can do some selling. So, and there have been, I haven't heard any for a while, but there was a time when there was a net. A group of people would get on one frequency at a certain, once a week. And they would say, so-and-so has such and such for sale, so and something else, blah, blah, blah. But I haven't heard those things on in a long time. I don't know if the FCC said anything about that. Most of the time it would be very obvious that none of those people, that was not their job. It was just all off the cuff, so to speak. And we got a boogie here. Okay, restrictions concerning the type of language that you cannot use. Yeah, indecent or obscene language is not permitted under any conditions. What type of stations can automatically retransmit signals to other stations? Repeaters should be very obvious because that's what we use around here a lot. And the repeaters are, we got one to the east of us, north, west. And you talk and it gets rebroadcasted. Auxiliaries are similar to a repeater, except it's not an automatic condition. Somebody has to be there to control it. So yeah, the answer is B. In which of the following circumstances may the control operator of an amateur station receive pay for using their radio in a classroom?
B.
When you are the teacher of the class. If a teacher invites you into the classroom and says, will you give a demonstration? No, you're not entitled to any pay. But if you're the teacher of the class and you bring in the radio and you give a demonstration, your pay is not for doing that particular thing. It's because you're the teacher. Under which of the following circumstances are amateur stations authorized to transmit signals related to broadcasting programs, production, news gathering, assuming there's no other way to get that information out? basically, you can do things that a normal radio station might do if it was possible, but it have to concern the safety of some person, the life of a person, or protection of property, or something along those lines. Then you could repeat what you heard on a radio station or something like that, some news item or whatever. It has to be life threatening. What is the meaning of the term broadcasting in the FCC rules for the amateur radio service? Well, broadcasting is you send out a signal, and it's not meant to anybody in particular, but it's anybody who's got a radio can tune it in and listen. So, number D, that the general public can basically hear. A lot of people have little radios in there. Some people have radios at home. When may an amateur station transmit without on-the-air identification? If I was talking on my radio, and sometimes I'll make short little comments without doing something that probably I should do. I need to identify myself. I have to use my call sign. It's not, if someone says, if Ron was to ask me, hey, are you going to be at the class tomorrow night? And I go, yes. I wouldn't be expected to say, yes, K6QOG. But if you start making a little bit longer than one word things, if you start having some kind of a communication at when you end that one little segment, I'm going to say depending on how long it is, but generally you're supposed to identify yourself at least once every 10 minutes. But I don't know, there's a lot of flexibility.
The rule of thumb is you have to identify yourself at least once during the conversation, and then at least every 10 minutes. That at least once needs to be at the end of the conversation. However, most people tend to start the conversation giving out the call sign. If it goes more than 10 minutes, you get at least a 10-minute mark. And then when you complete your conversation, you'll identify yourself. What's the reason? Because you're just keeping this out there. No one knows where it's coming from, who's responsible for the signal. Your call sign identifies you specifically as a person who is transmitting using that call sign.
But why at the end? That's why.
Well, let's say you're doing something on Snowstorm. Now they know
Who's doing it?
So the idea is that every 10 minutes you identify yourself. If you monitor our net set right at 9 o'clock, we always have an evening net. You're going to hear the control operator every once in a while come and give their call sign, because they probably have gone about 10 minutes without. They said a lot of things to different people, but they haven't identified themselves. So you're expected to identify yourself at least every 10 minutes.
And there is one time when you're allowed not to identify yourself. No.
Proximity to the radio control aircraft.
Oh, D. I thought